Okay, perfect. I'm going to get started. We are 3 minutes into the schedule. So first of all, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We are hosting today's webinar together with our partner Unity Group from Poland. And I'm also happy to welcome one of our clients, Vivre from Romania. I'm actually going to give both gentlemen the chance to introduce themselves in a second. But before we kick off, actually want to share a few things that have to be covered at the beginning. This webinar actually is planned to last for around 60 minutes, including a Q&A session at the end, if time permits. I would ask the audience if you have any questions. We'd ask you to post your questions into the questions box. And Sarah, who is supporting us in today's webinar, will pick up on the questions and try to address and actually assign to the right people to answer. And last but not least, this session, as you might have heard, is recorded, and we're going to share the recording right after the session with all of the attendees. Yeah, let's have a short look into today's agenda and what we want to cover today. Actually, we're going to start with a brief look into how COVID has actually affected the e-commerce and retail businesses. We will have a look, and Dominik will mainly cover this part, into the long-term effects of the COVID-19 and an outlook on the retail landscape and how we believe the landscape has changed or will change. And last but not least, we will have Andrei from Vivre actually share some of their initiatives and findings on the Romanian market during this crisis and what kind of initiatives they have come up in order to overcome those crises and maneuver through these challenging times. If you go to the next slide, please, just a quick overview on the speakers. It's going to be Dominik Janes, actually head of business at Unity Group EMEA, who's going to introduce himself in a second, and also Andrei Paraschiv from Vivre Group in Romania. Dominik, why don't you take the chance and introduce yourself and the Unity Group to the audience, and then I would ask Andrei following to give a quick introduction on himself and Vivre.
Thank you very much, Árpád, for the introduction. Welcome everybody to the webinar. A few words about Unity Group for those who may not have heard of us. So we've been on the market for 23 years. From the inception, we specialized in e-commerce. One of our claims to fame is that we built one of the first online bookshops in Poland in the year when we were founded, 1997. That was only 2 years after Amazon released the first bookshop. We have global operations. We have offices in Wrocław, Krakow, Zurich, and New York, slowly approaching 300 experts on board. We are end-to-end specialists in commerce transformation, with big emphasis on end-to-end, which means we start with the customer part, which means online shops, self-service portals, web portals, and what have you. Then moving on to the digitalization of the internal business operations, we also can take care of our clients' IT architecture. That predominantly means, that means a lot of things, right? Integration databases, but also when it comes to infrastructure, it increasingly means cloud and only cloud. We also focus quite a lot on data. We help you both understand and monetize your data. Maybe just one more thing. We work normally with larger organizations. Just a few examples of the companies we work with. This is Euro. We call it Euro on our site, right? It's a slightly Euro AGD RTV, which is the leader in e-commerce consumer electronics in Poland. Another of our clients are Volkswagen Group, Hyundai, outside of Poland, Onibus, or Swiss Re, one of the largest reinsurers. Just a few words for myself. I'm one of the partners at Unity Group. I'm actually based in Zurich, and my primary responsibility is international expansion.
Perfect. Thank you, Dominik. Andrei, would you mind maybe introducing yourself and sharing a couple of information around Vivre?
Sure. My name is Andrei Paraschiv. I've joined Vivre 2 years ago. I fell in love with this business because mainly Vivre is focused on making homes as beautiful as possible. So and it's quite big. We are now active in 9 countries, from Romania to Greece, and recently we've reached 6 million visits in a month.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrei and Dominik, for the introduction. Last but not least, I'm going to introduce myself to the audience. My name is Árpád Deàk. For those of you who wonder where this weird name is coming from, I'm originally Hungarian. My mother language is Hungarian. I grew up in Austria, though, have lived many years abroad, and came back to Austria back in the year 2006 and started to work for Emarsys roughly 6 years ago to build actually new emerging markets, starting with Eastern Europe, which we haven't had a footprint back then in the days. And today in my role, I'm actually responsible for our sales and growth within our existing and new business for the Central and Southern Europe region. For those of you who potentially are not aware of Emarsys, we as a company have been founded 20 years ago in Austria, which is also where we are headquartered still today. We have originally started, and that's quite of an interesting fact, 20 years ago as an email service provider. So if you think about 20 years ago about the industry, it was important to send fast and reliable deliverability emails, right? So deliverability had to be high back then. So that was our footprint that we had, and this is where we actually come from. Today, we are working together with thousands of brands globally to power their engagement with customers across channels. But we are not a data broker, so I wouldn't go into we are collecting data and making this data available. We rather help our customers to manage their data when it comes to CRM, loyalty, or any other direct to customer communication. The numbers that you can see actually on this slide is the data we store in our platform, and we started to actually compile this data and make it available in an outside platform that we call CEE Insight, that you might have seen in preparation for this webinar as well. We have partnered with a BI company on this to make this valuable data available to the wider audience and share trends and insights we see. So what we've been looking into today are the trends that we have seen out of those more than 5 billion consumer records that we store in our platform for our customers, and how these brands actually and how their digital touch points have increased over the past couple of weeks and months, and what's going to happen to consumer behavior when it comes to digital engagement of those consumers. If you go to the next slide, please, I'm actually going to start with my presentation on how COVID-19 has actually affected the e-commerce, but also the retail business. Next slide, please, sir. What you can see on the left-hand side in this graph actually is a screenshot of our CEE Insight tool, which is a free website, as I mentioned, we use to identify trends in consumer behavior. What you can see as an example is that the UK back in April, this is a chart that actually shows the time frame when first lockdown has happened and how it actually the numbers changed over time. And what you can see back in April as an example, there was a peak in the UK, something around 130% in online growth, year-on-year change from brands that worked with our platform. So that was a massive impact on the e-commerce and retailers, right? But what we have also seen in the UK back in May was that we have reached a plateau on online growth. So we thought there is actually a ceiling that we have reached, and it's not going to go too much further anymore, coming out of the data that all of those brands actually store within the Emarsys platform. At the same time, in the DACH region, if you were to have a look at this chart, you could see a decrease in online growth, and mainly because the stores have started to reopen again, right? If you go to the next slide, I have actually prepared a comparison of the trend and how the trend actually changed over the past 2 weeks. So this time frame shows only the past 2 weeks for retail businesses with an online shop. So we are capturing here the online sales of retail businesses across the different regions. And what you can see, despite what we thought is going to happen back in May, that the UK online industry is still further growing, and DACH region, meaning Austria, Germany, and Switzerland, is actually stabilizing as shops have fully reopened. Now it sounds logical to all of us, right, that online growth kind of reduces again if stores are reopening, but it doesn't necessarily mean that consumer confidence and willingness is returning and people are willing to go back and visit those stores again. If you think about, there are many people actually also that we are talking to that are saying that as we are returning to this, as we call it, the new normal, retail is going to play a big part in this whole game. And if you think about even you being a multi-channel retailer out there, we believe you need to ask yourself on how you actually are prepared for this big shift and this big part that retailers are going to play, and how you are prepared for this digital transformation and how you can utilize actually all the data and all the insight that you gather within your customer base, and how you can utilize on top of it in order to drive again traffic back to your brick and mortar stores, but at the same time also bring them back to your online shop. If you go to the next slide, please. What we are looking into here is actually a compilation of the year-on-year growth in web traffic, but at the same time on the chart below you can see the year-on-year growth in web engagement, which means either clicks on websites or mobile websites. Now, this data is coming directly out of the Emarsys platform and combines all of the billions of messages and billions of interactions that Emarsys actually collects on a daily basis. So we are not just seeing a big uplift in people visiting and browsing websites, which I guess each of you that is part of this webinar today would actually say that it's true and probably sees the same trend at his side. But we also see a more and more increasing time spent on digital media and more engagement on those websites, which comes hand in hand, right? Hopefully more web impressions also bring more engagement, more click, more mobile engagement. But the question to ask here actually, and this is what we would like to emphasize on, is how are you prepared to actually utilize this increased traffic and this increased demand on engagement of your clients and customers? Now, are you able to monetize and convert this increased traffic during the crisis? And this actually ties into the next slide that I would like to share with you, which, if you think about the key drivers for consumer behavior during the crisis, right? Some of them might sound logical to us. So for consumers, there have been key drivers that have mainly influenced them, but we believe there are four main areas, and I think also Dominik has shared his thoughts with me on that one. So the appetite for certain products, right, has been highly influenced by, first of all, we believe restrictions and regulations. Think about, we haven't been able to go outside and visit restaurants back in March, at least here in Austria where I'm living. You know, lockdown started mid of March, restaurants closed. So for somebody, I would call myself a foodie, right? That was a major impact, right? So that had the total impact on my key drivers on consumer behavior, on what to buy and how to buy. I stayed at home. I started to buy more cooking appliances. I ordered food in, which I usually wouldn't, right? But I started to cook and I started to order food in. So one of the major influencing areas was around restrictions and regulations. Second point, we all feared COVID-19. We didn't know to some extent what's going to come up, what's going to happen, right? Some of us more, some of us less, but at the end, all of us were afraid of the unknown, which made us start buying things we usually potentially wouldn't, this time of the year at least, right? And if I may remember, I'm not sure if everybody remembers, but people started buying toilet paper for some weird reason, right? Would you say that in March suddenly there is a huge demand on toilet paper? No, it was consumer behavior totally changed because of fear of COVID-19 and not being able to go out and buy certain stuff anymore. Third point, we all started to look after our personal comfort and well-being more and started to buy equipment supporting our fitness and health, which is natural, I guess, and logical to everyone. And last but not least, the economic situation had a huge impact on consumer behavior. People lost their jobs, sadly enough, went short on money for vacation, or long-planned investments just vanished from one day to the other. So all of these points had huge influence and were key drivers on consumer behavior and how it changed. If you go to the next slide, please. What we are seeing on this side actually is a comparison of revenue on the left side, revenue coming from pure e-commerce players against revenue coming from retailers' online business. So you can follow the trends yourself and maybe identify one or the other area that you are interested in. But I'd like to draw your attention to maybe two periods that had a significant impact on those numbers. If you were to look on the left side, and I guess it's the period around mid of April, where if you look into the chart of Poland, which is the purple one of pure e-commerce players, there was a huge drop in revenue coming from pure e-commerce players in Poland, right? At the same time, on the right-hand side, you can see Polish retailers and their online businesses started to pick up on the trend and increase their revenue. Now, there could be logical reasons for me why that happened. Soft reopening of brick and mortar stores, pure e-commerce drops, but not every trend is actually logical to us. It's actually the data, that gives us this response. Dominik, maybe because it's around Poland, right? And you have Polish roots and Polish by nature, right? And you have lived a long time in Poland. Can you actually share some thoughts with us on what you think has happened back then in mid of April and what has impacted this big drop? And on the other hand, you know, retailers picking up with online sales?
So it's quite a dramatic effect that we see here, right? I think the only other place that we see such a dramatic effect is Romania, but it's shifted. It's several weeks later. I think clearly the first increase is related to the restrictions. I think Poland was one of the relatively early first countries to introduce very, very strong restrictions, and the people just kind of moved to e-commerce. We have quite a high penetration of e-commerce in Poland. About 70% of consumers have purchased something online. So that's maybe the result for the initial increase. But then there's a very, very rapid drop. I would probably attribute it to two factors. On one side, yes, the large shopping malls were reopened on the 4th of May, and that's largely coincides with the drop. There's also an increase during that time for the traditional retailer, right? Which kind of the online business started growing. Again, maybe people started remembering those traditional retailers and also looking online. There's also a lot of evidence that they upped their game. They introduced things like click and collect, which increased the attractiveness of traditional retailers. Again, that could explain the increase beyond, let's say, the beginning of May. There's maybe one more factor that might be interesting for some of you. I don't know how many people from Poland we have on the call, but we had quite an interesting period. It was a period of presidential elections. The first attempt failed, but there was a very clear attempt from the government to reassure people that it's fine, that it's okay to go out, that it's relatively safe. And again, this happened around the same time when there's a drop in e-commerce. So these could be the influencing factors.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Dominik, for sharing your thoughts on this. Actually, me being a person traveling a lot to Poland, or at least in the past, since March I haven't been traveling, but knowing Polish government and how they have tried to re-secure people to actually go back into shops and get the economy up and running, I definitely believe that has to or was one of the major factors that impacted this huge drop in e-commerce and people again going out and shopping in brick and mortar stores and also using their online shops again. If you go to the next slide, or actually I think we have the poll coming up, right? Perfect. Thank you, Sarah, for this. Just a quick one here, and I would ask the audience maybe to post their answer into the poll that Sarah is going to display in a second for us. What do you think, which category did the highest trending product during lockdown belong to? So as I told you, Emarsys gathers so billions of consumer records and billions of purchase records. What do you think was the most trending product, or to which product category did the most trending or the highest trending product during lockdown actually belong to. If you please would just click on the category that you believe was the highest trending product belonging to, and we're going to show the results in a second. I think we're going to give it here a couple of seconds. I see poll is coming up. People are saying poll in progress still. Sarah, do we have enough answers? Yeah, still. I guess you can also see the poll rising. Here we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, here is the result. You guys think kitchen appliances, maybe influenced because of my answer that I gave. Kitchen appliances, tech and home office equipment second, sport and leisure, and apparel and cosmetics third. Sarah, should we actually unveil what information we have gathered throughout the lockdown? And I guess you will be surprised, guys. It's not kitchen appliances. If you look, or we have gathered and checked the data, the Swiss ball, the gymnastic ball, whatever you want to call it, had a rise, a year-on-year uplift compared to the same period of last year of more than 8,700%. I don't even know how much this is anymore, so I couldn't count it. The second one then was actually the tripod for, you know, as a stand for your camera or cell phone, whatever it might be. Then comes the dishwasher and the washing machine. And I'm not trying to say here this is right or wrong, the data. I'm just trying to make the point that consumer behavior is influenced by so many factors, right? During lockdown, there was irrational thinking going on by all those consumers out there. Is there a rational and logic reason that people started to buy tripods? Sarah actually told me, she's much younger than I, that yeah, for her it's logic, right? People started to film TikTok videos. People started to record for Snapchat and whatever. Now, me not being from the generation, not using TikTok or any other of those social channels, you know, it didn't make sense to me. But what I'm trying to say is there are consumer trends out there. There are consumer behaviors that we cannot rationally think about. But if you have the data available, and if you go to the next slide, please, Sarah, what I'm also trying to underline this with is the consumer product trends that we have seen over time. On the left side, you can see the trending products back in April. So I've made a screenshot of that just to show you what have been the trending products back in April. And on the right side, you can see the current trending products. So again, what have been the mostly bought products in year-on-year comparison during lockdown or midway lockdown, and then in the last 2 weeks, where we are almost 4 months into the lockdown already, or back into the new normal, and you see how consumer behavior changes, and suddenly dishwasher and washing machine and hand saws have a huge uplift in year-on-year comparison. Again, what I'm trying to say here, and the point I'm trying to make, you as a marketer being on this webinar, having tons of data available of your consumers, being able hopefully to combine this customer data, product data, sales data, web behavior data, multi-channel data that you are collecting, you need to listen carefully and analyze carefully in order to optimize your supply chain, ideally, right? To be able to answer those consumer behavior changes quickly, and in order to be agile in your marketing campaigns that you are preparing, and in order to be able to react to those changes in consumer behavior. Let's go maybe to the last slide of my presentation, with which I'm going to hand over to Dominik. Last but not least, I wanted to share current trends in the CEE region with you. What we have looked into is we have analyzed the increase in average order value for pure e-commerce players, and on the right side, retail online businesses, so retailers selling also online. And what you can see is that, interesting enough, out of the 5, there are actually 2 Eastern European countries who had a huge uplift in pure e-commerce players, right, which is Czech Republic on the average order value, and Estonia. And on the other hand, if we look into retail online businesses, and I think Andrei will be very happy to see this, or hopefully also share his thoughts around this in his presentation, but we see retailers in Romania have a huge uplift also in their online businesses, in their average order value, which is also one thing we see with our customers. First-time buyers are the new customer life cycle segments, we would say, that had the biggest increase. There are new and new customers suddenly discovering that there are online shops out there where I can shop, or they have to shop. And last but not least, now it's going to be an important focus on this customer lifecycle group of first-time buyers, because buying once is one thing, right? Keeping them as loyal customers is what we believe has to be the focus for retailers, but also e-commerce players in the near future. With this, Dominik, I would hand over to you, but before, I would just ask the audience if there are any questions, please post them into the questions box of your menu bar. We'll try to pick up on the questions at the end of the presentations, where we have secured a couple of minutes to answer your questions. Dominik, with this, I'm handing over to you, and I'm going to chime in if needed.
Thank you very much, Árpád. I couldn't help but smile when you were talking about the first the drivers, when you talk about the comfort and well-being, and then what was the main class of articles that were being bought online. Because I had exactly the same personal experience. Of course, the moment I had more time on my hands, I looked at myself. I decided that I'm too fat. So what did I try to do? I tried to basically hunt online for some gym equipment. And it transpired that it was virtually unavailable in Switzerland. You couldn't buy it. Everybody bought out everything. And if there were any leftovers, they were extremely expensive. So I was a victim of that. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. So this is I think Árpád was telling us about the information, the data that we can glean from various retailers that are working with Emarsys, and we could see how it changed, how it evolved during the COVID pandemic. Now, the thing is, the bigger question probably is, what's going to happen in the future? How will this impact the consumer behavior in the long run? I mean, is this just the blip and everything's going to go back to normal? We all know that's not going to happen, and Árpád already used the term, there's a new normal. And I think the challenge now is to predict what is the new normal. Before I go into details, I just want to bring up one little, it's not an anecdote, it's a real story. In 2003, there was a brief but very deadly SARS epidemic in Asia and a little bit in Canada, if I remember. It burned itself out very, very quickly. I think mortality was about 16–20%. But it permanently changed consumer behavior in China and in the Asia region. And there's a lot of analysts attribute the growth of Alibaba and the similar Chinese giants to this epidemic. This was effectively a tech catalyst that permanently changed consumer behavior. And I think we on the verge of something very, very similar happening not just in Europe, but around the world. So let's try to gaze into the crystal ball. I have three areas that I would like to talk about: impact on the traditional retailers, impact on e-commerce, and a slightly different look, having a look at basically the macroeconomic and social trends. I know we're running slightly behind schedule, Árpád, right? And I'm not a man of few words. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to focus maybe on two main points in each one of those slides, and only very briefly summarize the other ones. That way, maybe we can finish in 10 minutes. So let's start with traditional retail. The first two are relatively obvious, right? First one, shops are not going to disappear. I mean, people will need choice, they will always need choice, and there's an incentive to go out to buy. So I wouldn't just start closing any traditional shops. That will be there for the foreseeable future. But they will have to evolve, and technology is going to be one of the biggest drivers for evolution. What will happen, and we at Unity Group, obviously we are strong believers in that, is that e-commerce will very quickly emerge as the primary sales channel. Or it's already very close in certain economies. I think in the UK, 40% of retail is going through e-commerce, and that will happen. It's just there's too many advantages for that not to happen, and then we have to be prepared for this. But these are more generic trends. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the next two. What we see, let's still the 2 points in here. What we see is actually, we've seen that trend even before COVID, is that people started moving away from the large hypermarkets. So the overall market in terms of discount retailers or convenience shop was growing relatively strongly in Poland, while the hypermarkets were dropping, and Tesco exited Poland just partially because of that trend. There's also a report by Deloitte who claims that people feel much safer in the smaller and local shops than they do in the larger areas, and they're willing to spend more time there. I think that trend will stay, will accelerate, because, and that's my view. I know Árpád has a slightly different point of maybe data points. I'll be interested to hear his view. But when I think about myself, I see hypermarkets on one side a bit too overwhelming. There's almost like too much choice. And at the same time, compared to online, that's just not enough choice. And the experience is, I cannot have reviews, I cannot compare, whatever. So I would prefer to shop online. Árpád, what do you think?
Yeah, look, Dominik, thanks for bringing me in on this. It's not my personal view, but I'm sharing here recent experiences I had on different markets, also talking to hypermarkets, some of them being customers of Emarsys, some of them being potential customers for the future from different markets. I'm talking here about Romania, Poland, but also Hungarian hypermarkets. I have a slightly different view on this, but this is mainly on the information that I received. Now, hypermarkets do see themselves as one of the potential new shops to go to in the future, and there are two reasons for this. Number one, they combine, that's why they are called hypermarkets, I guess, a variety of products. So many of them told me, Árpád, we believe that we are one of those upcoming businesses or industries with hypermarkets, because people tend to go to one shop in the future. They want to do one stop. They want to buy their grocery. They want to buy their home appliances. They want to buy everything in one stop, go home again, and feel safe. Now, it's a bit contrary to what you are saying, Dominik, but again, it's a personal view, and on my end, it's actually information I have received. So hypermarkets do believe in some regions, at least. I talk again, Romania, Poland, and Hungary, and they believe that they are in a very trending spot and niche for the future, because of that fear that people have of visiting many smaller shops rather than going to one hypermarket. But again, something I have experienced in my latest talks to those people.
That's interesting. I think, again, crystal ball gazing. Different views. I just want to quickly mention the final point here, because this is something that very strongly emerged during the pandemic. There was enormous interest in the click and collect service. So the traditional retailer basically were able to offer pickup service. You could order online, but you pick up in the store. And there really has been a huge amount of interest. We even saw it in data from Emarsys, or at least I think that's correlated. Now, at Unity Group, we don't believe that's a trend that's going to last. We think that's a transitional phase. This is something that, on one side, it's much easier for the retailers to offer that service than a full end-to-end digital experience with home delivery. It's a first step. Another thing, a lot of, let's call it, online newbies might feel much more comfortable with the pickup service. For them, they still go to the shop, right? They still feel like they can go there. They can touch it, they can return it if they don't like it. They may also think that's cheaper because they don't pay for delivery. Again, that's something I remember my evolution. After a while, you start to realize that the time, effort, petrol, parking fees, and all the other things that you got in, that actually home delivery is cheaper. So we think the click and collect is something that emerged during the pandemic. It's not going to last. I think what may last, and I think that looks very, very interesting, is the parcel lockers. I mean, in Poland, the InPost is one of the leaders, potentially the leader in this. They installed over 7,000 lockers in Poland, and again, they experienced huge demand during the pandemic. And it's a very interesting service, because not only you can pick it up, you can also return. The second thing is, it's convenient. It's close. You don't have to wait for the delivery. You have normally 3 days to pick it up. And the reason I'm mentioning this in the context of the traditional retail is this could really help the smaller shops, convenience shops or discount retailers, because they can combine the parcel locker with their offering. They don't really compete, because they offer, convenience things, but it's an added incentive for people to just visit the shop, pick up the parcel, and go home. So that is something that I think it's here to stay, and it'll only increase. That's the retail. Let's move on. I think I don't have a lot of time. Let's move on to the e-commerce. Very quickly, clearly we saw the explosive growth in 2020. No point going too deep into this. 2021 is a bit difficult to predict because there's a pendulum effect, right? And if let's hope things get back to normal, or let's say we all still start feeling much safer, I think we will crave that human experience. We'll start going to the shops, to the restaurants, and I think there'll be a bit of a shift. We believe that's a temporary shift. I think the convenience, the thing that's stuck in people's minds, that's going to stay, and the trend towards e-commerce will be there, and it'll continue to increase. Again, let's focus on those three other points because they are much more specific, and potentially we can draw some conclusions. What we've seen during the pandemics is new groups of consumers discovered online, especially the older shoppers who in the past, clearly they're more traditional, didn't see the incentive. They had no choice because there were no other channels. And the second one, they were the most vulnerable group towards the COVID. So they discovered that, they liked it, they're going to continue. There's no doubt about this. But again, a bit of a tip for retailers, you have to make the experience easy, simple, and nice for them. Right? They're not always as sophisticated as the millennials. They want something that's similar to the shop experience. They cannot be over challenged. That stays. The other big trend that we've seen is, again, because of necessity, there's a huge increase in groceries and fast-moving consumer groups that were being bought online. And again, this is a trend that's been going on for a while, but it's slow because there's a natural skepticism towards buying things that you normally want to feel and pick, buying it online. If I had more time, I could tell you about my experience in the UK, but that's maybe a separate topic. But in the UK, a quarter of the population buys groceries online. In countries like Spain, Germany, I think Italy fluctuates between 8 and 13. In Poland, it's only 4%. There's an enormous scope for growth, and that will definitely grow because after you discover how convenient it is, you will buy groceries and other packaged goods online. The last point, and again, I'll refer back. Actually, Árpád, would you like to comment anything on the groceries?
Well, not comment, but maybe share my experience, especially on the Austrian market and during lockdown, what I have experienced. The biggest retailers here in Austria haven't been able to fulfill the demand on buying groceries. It's not a common thing in Austria, to be honest, to buy groceries online. And even I being, I would say a sophisticated online shopper, I wouldn't. In Austria, I wouldn't buy groceries online. Still, during lockdown, everybody was trying to buy groceries online, right? So the couple of big retailers who are sharing or who have the biggest market share in Austria haven't been able to deliver for the next 6 weeks. So think about if you're trying to order groceries because you don't want to leave your house, and then the delivery date you are getting is mid of April, right? It's like you're like, okay, thank you. I don't think I'm going to order anything. So because you mentioned those lockers, right, and parcel lockers, that's not a common thing here in Austria. It's offered by the Austrian Post, but it's not a common thing that businesses would use to deliver their goods. It's mainly Amazon actually who is using it to say, okay, I can deliver it to a parcel store. But your online order in those privately up and managed pickup points is actually almost not existing here in Austria. So groceries online, I totally agree. It's something that we see also being on the rise, but I don't think everybody is well prepared for the rise yet.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it varies across countries and regions. Final point on e-commerce, right? We have to expect in the future large and sudden fluctuations in demand. During the pandemic, there was Black Friday every day. Then we saw again in the data from Emarsys, there was a rapid drop. The moment there's a new restriction, that's going to go back. One of our clients, relatively large clients, actually told us just a couple of weeks ago that we need to scale up the shops that we provide for them by a factor of 5 within the next 2 months. That's the expectation that they have for the autumn season. I think they forecast further lockdowns, further restrictions, and I think people are going to increasingly turn to e-commerce. And that has to if you're a retailer, unfortunately, you have to be prepared for that. It could go again either way. It could be your e-commerce presence could be flooded with demands, or it could actually be your physical stores. well, I wouldn't be myself if I didn't mention Unity Group. We have cloud-based scalable architecture, so if you need help, feel free to talk to us. Let's go to the last slide. Just a few words, and then I'll hand over to Andrei. Thank you very much. Just very briefly, because we are running out of time. We talked about, let's say, slightly different aspects, but let's move and let's look at different angle, right? We've kind of been lulled into the sense of security by a huge amount of money that's been printed over the last months, right? The government's had no choice, and I think that was the right decision to support people, to ensure that there was no enormous amount of bankruptcies, unemployment, and so on. But that cannot last. At some point, they will have to phase that out. And then the reality will start to bite, right? There's going to be end of those programs, there's going to be raising unemployment, further bankruptcies, and that will have impact on consumer behavior. People will become more cautious. Another thing is deflation or inflation. You know, when we all here, and especially in Central Eastern Europe, we've experienced inflation, we feel that if the government start printing money, that's going to mean inflation. I actually thought the same thing in 2009 during the financial crisis. Didn't happen. The majority of economists do not believe inflation will actually happen. That's probably not going to be enough demand, and that could mean to further deflation, and that again will impact consumer behavior. They'd rather wait until things become cheaper. They will not go out and buy. And again, maybe the answer will be more money being printed, but it's hard to say. At the moment, all the money that's being printed goes into the stock market and property investment, and that's not good news for retailers. Last 2 points very quickly. People will start working from home more frequently. That's also here to stay. That's not going to go away. What that means, footfall will drop. There's going to be fewer people out there. That's bad news for catering, bad news for people who offer fashion, impulse buys, and all these other things. And a final point, we talk about COVID, but over the last 10 years, we actually had a number of epidemics. They didn't necessarily register in common consciousness as much as COVID, but we had Zika, we had MERS, we had SARS, we had swine flu, we had other things. And based on predictions from a lot of people, COVID may not be the last one. So let's continue to invest in our digital presence. Thank you. I'll hand over to Andrei then. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Dominik, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Really interesting to hear, and especially that one point, you know, working from home, that being the new normal. I'm going to be the unhappiest person on this, being very socially connected and not being able to interact with people, not just in the office, but also privately, is something I'm having a huge problem with. That's why I'm coming to the office every day trying to see people, but there is nobody coming in. So let's hope it's not the new normal, but still, I think we are all prepared for this for the future. Andrei, without further ado, I would ask you to jump into your presentation, share some thoughts with us on especially the Romanian market, if you will, and more interestingly on how Vivre, being one of the biggest retail chains in furniture and home appliances in Romania, but also across Europe, as we have seen, on how you have actually maneuvered through the crisis, and if there have been any initiatives or new ideas that you have come up with in order to overcome this crisis. So over to you, Andrei, and I'll chime in if needed.
Sure, I'll try to go as fast as possible since we're kind of late. As I said before, I'm Andrei. I'm the direct marketing manager at Vivre. Vivre sells mainly home and deco. But during this crisis, we tried several things to somehow handle the unpredicted. The unpredicted was, now it's a exhausted topic, the COVID impact, but it really impacted a lot Romania. I'm speaking strictly from Romania because this was my personal experience. Everything was closed. Everybody was online. The streets were empty. I was looking outside. It looked like in the middle of the night. And at Vivre, we quickly did see how the sales dropped. I'm talking about March. Sarah, next slide, please. Okay, so we came up with one initiative. That's the Together initiative. This was mostly a soft launch because we wanted to test this pilot in Romania and then expand it to the rest of the countries. So what we did, we saw how the crisis impacted mainly offline retailers. We assume that the demand in our products is going to drop. We had a great infrastructure of how we process products, and we wanted to also expand our commercial offer and also try to help other clients. So mainly we opened a marketplace using some from the initiative to the launch. We had only 2-3 weeks. We launched the product. We said, hey, offline retailers using our internal channels, newsletter, website, Facebook, and we announced, hey, if you want to get listed on Vivre, we are offering this. Send us an email here. We're happy to help each other. And we offered our platform. Sarah, next slide, please. And our platform is pretty popular. We have 6 million visits per month. We have a lot of subscribers. Every online channel we tested and saw it was efficient. We kept it and we use it as much as possible. We are strictly online. We don't have any offline place. The only offline presence we have is the office and the warehouse. And that's how Vivre, from selling furniture and nice decorations, we ended up selling wine and other fast-moving consumer goods, but also other complementary products for Vivre. Sarah, next slide, please.
Yeah, Andrei, may I just jump in here and also share my experience on this? First of all, you are a customer of Emarsys, and that's why I'm regularly checking your website. So what happened to me back a couple of weeks ago, I suddenly see, as you mentioned, wine, coffee, I think I've seen, and some other groceries on Vivre website. So I thought first either it's buggy or something happened to you. I didn't know that you guys are actually opening up your business and actually being available as a marketplace for your clients. So that was my personal experience. I didn't know about it. Second thing is, it's actually something that I really believe is totally interesting and might be something for other retailers to think about. Although it's not that easy to open up and actually become a marketplace. So my question to you would be, you mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 weeks from the initiative to the first products being online, right? But still, it's much more than this, right? I mean, I know you are an agile company and you guys are techies, I would call, right, in the background, most of all, but still, acquiring people who want to sell their goods on your website, having a business model behind this, and then making it available, feeding all the product data into it. How long did it really actually take you that it's now up and running?
It took about 2 weeks since we had the idea till we announced, and a few people was on board. A few retailers were on board. But we had some help, and we were somehow lucky because the way our business is built, we offer some partners, some suppliers. We offer them some page that they can use to adjust the stock or do certain things. But still, the commercial team is really hands-on, and they have to do a lot of corrections, adjustments to accommodate the products on our platform.
Andrei, if I can quickly chime in, right? I don't want to take your time, but this is very impressive. Congratulations. I think it's also a great example of how you leverage the opportunity to basically go into this market space area. And when I look at what's happening on the Unity Group side, right? Over the last 1 or 2 years, we actually see rapidly increasing number of inquiries from clients who want us to build their marketplaces. That's the direction, and well, kudos to you by using pandemic to basically create your own marketplace.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a good idea, and it was appreciated by other retailers, and I think even our customers. So now what I'm gonna continue with the marketing strategies. We also saw that it will be a lot more difficult to increase the conversion, and we try to rethink everything and see where we don't do very well, and we try to adjust. I'm not going to go into the details, we don't have any more minutes, but we try to optimize every channel as much as possible. Sarah, next slide, please. And also, while the pandemic started and the lockdown, the first 2 weeks, while everybody went crazy and started buying, as you said, Árpád toilet paper and long-term for non-perishable food, we reduced a lot of the spending, of the marketing spending. We try to reduce as much as possible since we saw how the sales dropped during that time. And we monitored for a couple of weeks. Actually, we're still doing this, the organic direct traffic and newsletter channel, because these are our customers and they have the first clue. It's too hard to affect these channels with campaigns when we look at them from this perspective. And when we saw after that craze, the first 2 weeks, when everybody started to accommodate with the idea, okay, this is the new normal, we have a pandemic we need to handle, let's try to continue our lives with this. We saw that these channels had signs of improvement, and when we saw that it was not just a peak, it's something constant, that these channels are improving, we just exploded the traffic, the investment. We invested what we lost and reduced before, and we accelerated as much as possible in performance and mostly new users. We were getting more new users with almost no marketing spend than we were before. So a huge wave of new clients entered Vivre. Sarah, next slide, please. Another campaign that, another tactic that helped me a lot was the price drop. As I said earlier, when we try to optimize the channels, I've seen that the upper funnel while people are still considering products and browsing products, I've seen that we could do better there. And okay, we have abandoned cart, we have favorites. When you have add something to favorites, we will send you a notification when it's back in stock or we have a lower price. But we didn't have this for just browsing a product. People probably, our customer probably didn't add it to the cart or add it to the wish list. And this program, I think, is my favorite now. It's half of the automated revenue that we run through Emarsys. And some numbers that I'm really proud of are the newsletter Romania year over year, whole March to end of June, we have a 164% increase, and we are aiming to the year over year growth whole year this year for 50%. We need to see how we can do better in the rest of the countries. Romania is more easy to adjust because we're here, but we're going to try to understand better the countries.
Wow, just a quick note on this, Andrei. First of all, congratulations to those numbers, and thank you for sharing this. If I understand it right, just to make the point here to the audience as well, what you are doing is actually you have found a way to automate your process. If people are visiting your website, browsing a certain product, I guess, and you have managed to find a way, I guess, with our tool helping to automate this process to notify people when a product that they have browsed in the past actually dropped in price. So you are sending them a notification, an email, notifying them that the recent product they have browsed on the website has dropped in price, and kind of sending them a call of action, right?
Exactly. Exactly as you said. We actually the subject line is good news. A product you might like has a better price now, and it's just phenomenal. If a customer saw a product once or twice or several times, this can be adjusted. We reach out to that customer and send him an email, and it's just a great result. I think this campaign should be mandatory to any e-commerce right next to abandoned cart and wish list programs. It's really
absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Andrei, for sharing this and also sharing the numbers and these great two initiatives that you had, especially the first one, thinking outside the box. I think this is something that we also, if we go to the next slide, we wanted to summarize and provide a short summary and the key takeaways. So, Andrei, I would just start with you as you were the last one speaking. Why don't you share your key takeaway for the audience with us? Then I would ask Dominik to share his, and it would be me, last but not least, sharing my key takeaway.
Okay. Yeah, thinking outside the box to bring new revenue streams is a thing that I don't think we need to have a pandemic to do that on a daily basis. We should do that anytime. I know it's exhausting. Sometimes probably is not really rewarding enough, because you have to go through a few fairs to find a new revenue stream. But I think we should do this more than we think.
Perfect, thank you. And I couldn't agree more on your statement. And I think your initiative has shown to the audience that there are ways to actually build new revenue streams or increase existing ones with certain initiatives that you have actually shown to us today. Thank you for this, Andrei. Dominik, what about your key takeaway?
Thank you. So the key takeaway is digital is the future and there's no going back. So basically we have to invest in omni-channel platforms. What I would focus on is, first one, omni-channel. People are different, the expectations are different. Don't just focus on one sales channel, have several. Second one, user-friendly. That way you're going to reach the largest amount of consumers. And at the moment that there's a lot of shifts happening there. Scalable, not just because it's growing, but also because it will fluctuate and you need to be able to adjust to the demand. And finally, we haven't talked about this, but as competition, as more stuff moves more and more online, your platforms have to be secure, because there's a lot of criminals out there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominik, and totally agree on your statement. We also see the same shift. Obviously, digitalizing your business, I think, is something that is on the rise. People have seen, and especially retailers have recognized, that if there is a lockdown, mostly your revenue is gone, because what we have seen in statistics, 80% of the retail revenue comes from brick and mortar stores or from the offline sales. So you need to increase. There is no way around it. You just need to be prepared for it with a proper platform. And last but not least, and that's my key takeaway that I would like to share with the audience, is you need to use your customer product and sales data in order to understand what is selling, in order to understand what is trending, and in order to be able to actually react to those fast-moving consumer behaviors. I think we have managed to actually show today that consumer behaviors are sometimes totally irrational, right? Sometimes they are logical, and sometimes they are changing very fast. So if you don't have proper digital platform in place in order to react fast to those trends, I think you're going to be in not the best spot, let's put it this way, and your competition will overcome. We have run out of time, and I'm really sorry about this. I haven't seen any questions though, but still, to the audience, if there are any questions, please reach out to us. I think you have all the email addresses available of Emarsys and also Unity Group, and I'm happy to also coordinate if there are any questions directed to Andrei. I'm pretty sure he will be happy to answer them offline. Again, thank you very much for joining our today's webinar. If there are any questions, please just send us an email or get in touch with us, with the people you know at our companies. As mentioned in the beginning, we're going to share this recording to all the attendees, so please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again for joining. Have a nice day, and keep in touch, and be safe, everyone.
Thank you for joining, Árpád. Thank you very much for hosting. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Dominik. Thank you, Andrei, for your time, and see you soon, guys.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.